In 2003, 12 years ago, Cage, at that time known as Cage Prisoners, was established. And initially, our sort of line that we had was that we were the voice for the voiceless.
Because I remember a time when Guantanamo Bay first opened up, we would go into different communities and they would say things like, there's no smoke without fire. If these people are in Guantanamo Bay, then they've obviously done something wrong. The Americans just wouldn't hold people in detention without charge. You know, they wouldn't hold them in such a way if they didn't have any evidence on them, because they have a proper judicial and legal system.
Now, our view at that point was that the iconic figures, the images we saw of people in Guantanamo, those men who were sitting on their knees, who had no voices, had no faces, had no names. Our job was very much to say that we wanted to know who these people were, what was their story, how were they there. These were meant to be, the Bush has said, the worst of the worst. So our view was very much that we needed to give those people voices, we needed to give them faces, we needed to give them names.
Why do you defend suspected terrorists? That question actually sits at the very heart of who Cage is. Because what people don't understand is that we're not defending individuals per se. What we're doing is we're defending principles. These principles are extremely important, because if we don't defend these individuals and the difficulties that they're having, where they've had their rights taken away from them, then at some point those rights are going to be taken away from us as well.
And at that time, despite all the opposition, many people said to us that you can't do this. All the odds are against you. If you speak out, you'll be in Guantanamo.
Now, there may well be people in Guantanamo Bay that have done things that are terrible. And there are people there who are completely innocent, who have not done anything wrong whatsoever. But it's extremely important that we understand that no matter who they are, whatever background they come from, and whatever they did, there is an important principle at stake here. And Cage is about defending that principle.
Due process, the rule of law, injustice. So what we try to ensure happens is that due process is followed, particularly in the case of the disappearances, the enforced disappearances, Guantanamo, the secret detention process, the extraordinary renditions process. These are all places where due process hasn't happened, where people have been rendered to, not to justice, but to injustice and detention without trial. In terms of the rule of law, people haven't been tried, people haven't been given their day in court, and in honesty, even if they are given their day in court, in many cases where torture evidence is used, we simply believe that that is not due process and that is not access to the rule of law. In the absence of these mechanisms, there can only be one outcome: injustice, and that is what we're fighting against.
There are hundreds of people, documented cases of people who've suffered aggressive raids. And in many of the cases what we've seen, there are people who have not been linked to any plot or who don't pose any national security threat. Rather, they're people who knew people who knew people. Collateral damage. And that's the reality. The war on terror has been brought home to you. And the question is, where do you go? Who do you speak to? Who do you seek help from? Do you go to the authorities who harm you? Do you go to the state that intrudes on you? Do you go to the communities who may mistrust you? Rather, you go to an organization who has been putting itself at the forefront for over a decade. Cage.
We have to defend the rights of everyone, because if we don't, then what will happen is that rights will be continually taken away until what we're left with are basically the carcasses of justice systems.
There must be, in order to end conflict and to resolve conflict, a desire to discuss, to talk to humanize those people who you've been regarding as the enemy and those who you regard as the most unpalatable. Without this will, conflict can only continue.
We don't want to be around forever. We don't want to be here for another 12 years. We've always said that we want Cage not to exist because we want injustice not to be in the world. But at this time, Cage is still operating despite having no bank account. We've given names to those who are nameless. We've given voices to those who are voiceless. We've given faces to those who are faceless. Mozambique has spoken for us nationally and internationally. And many of the other detainees have done that. And our work will carry on. And I think that despite all the pressures and the odds that are stacked up against us, we've made up to one point overcome one challenge. And now what we're trying to do is the next phase. The work that we do is not something that is restricted just to policymakers or to sponsors. It's ordinary people, Muslim and non-Muslim, who have been helping out. They understand injustice. Everyone knows injustice when they see it. And the fact that they can sponsor us by giving us £1 a month or £10 a month, whoever it may be, whether it's a housewife from Bradford, whether it's a student from Cardiff, and whether they're Muslim or they're non-Muslim, we have relied on Allah's help first, but also your continued support. And what we'd ask for is for that to continue and for us to hopefully take the next step to try and eradicate injustice.